Okay, folks, welcome. We are here today. This is day one of Trump's administration, the first full day that is. NIAC, this is the National Iranian American Council. We've decided to hold a Twitter space to discuss the new travel ban, Trump's travel ban. So I will pivot to Ryan to start us off on giving us an overview of what Trump did in his first term. I would like to also flag, if you have any questions, please either DM NIAC Council at NIAC Council, or you can email us at travelban@niacouncil.org. So that is TRAVELBAN at niacouncil.org for questions. Ryan, I'll hand it over to you to give an overview spiel on what Trump did in his first term.
Yeah, great. So Donald Trump came into office in 2021 and within his first week imposed a Muslim ban, coming off of promises to impose a total and complete shutdown on Muslims entering the United States. He asked his advisors how to do so legally. And what they ended up doing was taking 7 countries that were targeted in Obama's visa waiver program. Those restrictions barred individuals from Iran and other nations from coming through the visa waiver program without applying for a visa. The Muslim ban, however, went much farther. It barred anyone from Iran from securing a visa. The first ban even applied to green card holders, causing chaos at the airports and sparking major protests and really kicking off, I think, a large grassroots movement against Trump and a lot of the things he was doing in his first term. Now, that initial order was blocked by the courts, given the long track record of Trump, saying he was going to impose a Muslim ban based on religion and then doing it to some or large degree. Now, that prompted a second ban to come down. And in that ban, which was enacted in March of 2021, there was a security review. So the bureaucracy of the Trump administration reviewed all of the vetting protocols for issuing visas, and then later that summer identified, okay, here are the nations that are deficient in transferring security information to the United States, and in effect largely upheld a lot of the nations who were targeted by the ban. Some came onto the ban, some dropped off, but it was largely, the same ban that was in place. Then a third ban came down. This was Presidential Proclamation 9645, and it was the one that was upheld throughout much of Trump's first term in office. The Supreme Court reviewed it in, I believe it was Trump v. Hawaii in 2022, and then in a 5-4 decision upheld the travel ban and citing waivers and so forth as a reason that it could be implemented. That was in place until Biden entered office, and on his very first day ended the Muslim ban while leaving extreme vetting and other policies in place. So what we saw for Iranian visas in particular is that visa issuances increased pretty significantly from the low thousands for immigrant and non-immigrant visas under Trump up until the kind of around 25,000 under Biden here towards the end of his term. Now, what we were expecting to happen was maybe Trump comes back in and imposes a travel ban right away, but that's not exactly what Trump did yesterday. He enacted a new executive order that directs the bureaucracy, specifically the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Homeland Security, to initiate a new security review that will queue up within 60 days, potentially, the return of a travel ban in whole or in part on certain nations. And then I think critically, it goes beyond kind of the travel ban in the first term and sets up kind of a review process for individuals from countries targeted under any new ban who received visas over these last 4 years when the Muslim ban was not in place, the travel ban was not in place. and it sets up a process for deportations of some of those individuals. So we view this as very concerning. There are some things we know now, there are some things we don't know, but we're trying to gather here with a few different experts to kind of hash all that out and talk through what the options are, answer some questions from the audience, and hopefully leave with a firmer understanding of where we are and where we're headed here ahead of the possible return of the ban. So I'll stop there, Miriam, and maybe we can, turn it over to some of the other speakers as well.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I really appreciate that. Was a great overview of what we've experienced before and what's to come. And I wanted to just introduce some of our new co-hosts. We have Joseph Burton here, who is an excellent resource on all things Muslim ban because he was once forced to implement it as a former U.S. diplomat and is now writing a book on the ban. We have another speaker here today, Yasmin Tayeb. She's an Iranian American human rights attorney and Democratic National Committee official. She is joining us here today to share her expertise, as well as Abid Ayub. He is the National Executive Director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. We're really grateful to have you on here, all of you. So I will have, I wanted to say I think if you could also share what you all have know so far, what you are hearing from your communities, and what are you expecting from this new travel ban. Yasmin, you can go ahead.
Sure. Can folks hear me? Sorry, Twitter's a bit weird. If you can hear me, if you can do a thumbs up, that would be great. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much to our friends and colleagues at NIAC for organizing this this Twitter chat to talk about the executive orders that came out yesterday. Ryan's overview was incredibly helpful. And I mean, when I read through this portion of the order that would pertain to a future ban, I mean, again, we don't know what countries will be in it. We anticipate the countries that will be included. A lot of us are under the impression that, Iran will be in it, Yemen, potentially Somalia and Sudan. These are some of the countries that obviously, they don't share vetting issues with the U.S. There are countries that were previously targeted by this administration. And when I read through parts of this order, what, was alarming to me was not just that, okay, well, this is going to be another iteration of the Muslim and refugee and African bans, and it looks like he's trying to put some sort of administrative record in place to try to survive judicial review, right? So there's various things that his administration did wrong initially, which is why he did multiple iterations. And the third iteration, as was noted, was the one that survived judicial review, survived at the Supreme Court. So I anticipate that this executive order ban will mimic that third iteration. The part that I wanted to flag that was particularly alarming to me was the section where it looks as though Trump and his administration is going to try to deport folks that will be impacted by this ban that came to the U.S. after January 20th, 2021. So it looks like he's trying to implement it retroactively, which I don't even see how that's possible. I mean, that's not permitted under the Immigration and Nationality Act, which is what this is based under, INA. So, I mean, that to me was alarming. I anticipate there's going to be further litigation once this executive order formally rolls out in 60 days, and depending on how it's implemented and depending on the communities that are going to be impacted and if he actually moves forward with starting to remove, expel, deport those under the executive order, but just wanted to flag some of those initial concerns. I mean, for many of us who are on this call, we're pretty active during, I was going to say unfortunately or fortunately, during Trump's first administration around the Muslim and refugee and African bans. And one thing I wanted to highlight was, I mean, those partners or communities, they're all there. They're ready to go. The No Muslim Ban Ever Coalition, the campaign that my organization co-chairs, we're going to be having a series of organizing calls, calls to action, and kind of know your rights. Webinars and pamphlets and things for the community to ensure that everyone's prepared and how to effectively respond. But the other thing I just wanted to flag that we've spoken a lot about when we're thinking through how we grappled with some of these discriminatory, unconscionable, and unconstitutional policies during his first term is not only that we rightfully fought these policies every step of the way, and we had a very massive collaborative coalition, and the movement showed up every single time. But the one thing that I wanted to note that we should be prepared in doing very quickly and effectively is getting stories out as soon as possible. Families that we know are being impacted, being targeted, being removed. I mean, that's one thing that it's hard for a lot of our organizations. Many of us don't have very robust comms shops. So I just wanted to kind of flag that that's something we should probably work on, coordinating a comm strategy and effectively responding to some of these threats. But thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Yasmin, for that really good overview on your end. We really, really appreciate it. I wanted to also invite Abed to see what he is seeing in his community and what he's going through his perspective. I'm going to move on to questions. And we also have Joseph Burton joining as well, so I will get to him in a moment. But Abed, did you want to also briefly share what you're experiencing in the community and what you're, what can we do to prepare, and what are you seeing, especially on the litigation?
Sure. Thank you, and thank you for organizing this. Look, for our community, I mean, unfortunately, this was something that was anticipated, and there was the expectation that it would be a bit, they would handle the rollout differently. Of course, there's the 60 days window that the State Department and DHS have to give the suggestions of the countries that could be listed. Of course, we know where that's going to end up. But I think it's important, what really has the community concerned, what has us concerned, is to understand that this is more than just the Muslim ban or the travel ban. This executive order is 2 or 3 executive orders rolled into one. The language that stands out to us is the language about the ideological exclusion, bringing that practice back, where, folks who may not be from the banned countries may still get their visas denied or maybe banned from entering the U.S. if it's deemed their ideology is not in line with the Trump administration's, or it's deemed to be un-American. Also, there is language in this ban of retroactively, in this EEO, of retroactively applying some of these new measures, not necessarily related just to the ban itself, but some of these new measures around the ideology part. And it does get into folks that entered after January 2021 and ensuring that they do not bear hostile attitudes towards the U.S., its citizens, culture, government, or founding principles. That's problematic. That seems to be language targeting students, targeting those that were at the encampments. And this seems to be another way to go after those in our community that have been speaking up on the Palestine issue, or those in our community who have been active. So while the ban is getting a lot of attention, this language here of the exclusion of going after people that are already in the U.S., it's very similar to NSEERS, decades ago. It's similar to that, and it could be the start of building a registry of foreign nationals here in the U.S. that could be used to remove or deport. Also, on the issue of removal, this executive order does mention that. So whenever you have the word removal, that's beyond just having the visa denied. Removal is going after people that are here in the U.S. So this is going to be a two-pronged approach: stopping folks from coming in with the ban, with the visas being denied, and then also going after people that are already here. This was the intention of, in 2017. That didn't pan out for him, but that's what it seems like they're going after here. As far as litigation is concerned, look, I'm from the mindset that, we played our hand in 2017 with the litigation. 212F is a very strong statute. It's been used by presidents all the way back, from Carter through Biden, used it during COVID. So it doesn't seem that 212F of the INA is going anywhere. It's most likely going to be upheld. But we have to look at, other options outside of just litigation. We have to look at how the removal and ideological exclusion stuff plays out as well, and whether or not there's going to be any legal challenges around that and what those may be.
So, Abed, I'm so glad you mentioned NSEERS, because that is immediately where my mind went. NSEERS was like a biometric periodic check-in for people from a list of countries, and you could guess who those were. Me looking at this as a former bureaucrat and visa officer, I'm immediately thinking of the jurisdictional question about this. I see in this executive order a lot of undefined authority, especially for the new elements, right? These questions about There's questions about ideological screening. There's also, interestingly, like the question about like culture, right, being put in here, and how exactly that definition is going to break down is going to make a big difference. I think even for stuff like religious worker visas, right? But the biggest X factor I see that hasn't already been covered is what they say is this review of visa programs to make sure that they're not basically undermining America. And I could see that apply for everything from student visas to work visas to even who gets to do exchange programs, right? Like the J1 cultural exchange visa, like the Fulbright program is administered by the State Department Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. And if they say, start looking at these closely, like, so there's changing things for people already here. There's changing things for people applying for visas. But what I see in here is a commitment to structurally changing what types of things visas can be issued for. And I also don't see where the authority gets delineated. DHS last time put up the list of countries that were kind of not in compliance. State had a role in it, but they also say the Director of National Intelligence could be involved. Part of me thinks that a lot of this is kind of a power play by DHS for the visa process, which would be in line with how the Trump admin thinks about this more broadly.
Thanks so much, Joseph, for that overview. Really, again, Joseph, thanks for jumping in. I know you're writing a book about your experience at State and dealing with the travel ban, number one, and during Trump's first term. I just wanted to flag for people. For months, NIAC staff has been planning, connecting with legal experts, other affected community leaders, and gathering resources ahead of this moment. So I highly recommend to visit our Travel Ban Center, which is included and pinned on our page at niaccouncil.org. So just wanted to flag that. So I wanted to ask a question for any of the panelists. What are the new things that you see in these executive orders? What for you strikes as most concerning? And how is, in particular, what is different from this time from last time? And also another question I had is, how likely is it that waivers or exemptions will be part of a new ban? I know during the first administration, we had, there was a waiver process, but it was not implemented as well. So I would love to hear your all thoughts about that.
I got tons of thoughts about waivers, and I actually already see perhaps a space for a waiver process that could become important in some of the new things that are prepared here. Could I run with this for a minute? So last time waivers and exemptions were kind of the name of the game, right? In terms of the way visa officers at consulates and embassies approached it. There was an institutional opposition to the Muslim ban, right? Like 1/3 of all serving diplomats put their names on a dissent cable, basically saying this is a mistake, this is a bad idea. And if I served with anyone who thought the ban was a good idea, they kept quiet about it just because they were a minority within the institutional culture. There are people who maybe were not friendly to Muslims or Iranians, but they just thought that the ban was pointless, stupid, and got in the way of what they considered to be their real jobs. From a cultural perspective, for a number of reasons, I'm not sure that's going to be as much the case this time around. But also, waivers and exemptions aren't really defined in this executive order because the visa issuance process isn't really defined, right? Like the state is not named and visa issuance is named lightly. But I do see one thing that's kind of important here. When they talk about this review process of basically people who've been admitted since 2021, right, to remove anyone who has been who's been in the U.S. under these, the provisions of basically permanent ineligibility. So first, reviewing everyone who's already in the country, who's come in since 2021 from a ban list country, seeing, okay, have you engaged in any of these activities that would be that would render you ineligible or make us deport you, unless you being here facilitates an ongoing investigation, or if it's in the interests of U.S. national security, right? And last time when we talked about waiver criteria, there were basically like three things, like 3 bullet points for what constitutes waiver criteria. It was like national interest. It was national interest. There was a second one, I forget, that I never really filed that many waivers for. And then there was national security. National interest, undue hardship, and then national security. National security, which, by the way, was already taken care of by extreme vetting. Undue hardship. Remember, undue hardship was never the undue hardship of the applicant themselves. It was the undue hardship of an American citizen that they were related to, usually. But national interest was a category pretty broadly defined, right? I see a germ or a seed of that possibility in the removal proceedings of something like, oh, my presence in the United States is essential to national security, broadly defined. Now, how open are people going to be to this waiver process? I think that's going to be very contingent upon which agency is adjudicating this, right? Where I think if it comes down to the review of already admitted aliens from banned countries, if that lands in USCIS's lap, that's one thing. If it lands in DHS's lap, that's going to be a little trickier based on institutional culture.
Yeah, so I think answering the question on waivers first, and adding to what Joseph just added there, we have to remember that the waiver wasn't used very often. So you have these 3 criteria that were staked out and so forth, but the waiver process was heavily criticized as a sham in the first term. And, this was something that was pointed out during the Supreme Court case in the dissenting opinions by Sonia Sotomayor and others, citing hard data that said, look, these waivers are in the low single digits, so it's not really being used effectively in order to identify the people who meet those 3 criteria. But again, there's no ban in place yet, so we don't have the answer to some of these things right now. It's possible that a waiver process is included. It's possible that more waivers will be issued under a new ban, but we just don't know yet. I think the other thing is referring to the last iteration of the ban on Iranians. There were exemptions for student visas, and so some number of students were able to continue to get visas because they were just not targeted in the order. And so we don't know, is it going to be a partial ban? Are there going to be exemptions? Are there going to be, Elon Musk came out and said Iranian nationals contributed a great deal to the U.S. economy. Is that going to have some influence on things? Who knows? But I think the other thing, and we brought this up before, most concerning element to me right now is this second part of the ban. That is, it's not just denying people who don't have a visa yet the ability to get a visa, which had a tremendous hardship on a lot of individuals over the last 4 years. And it was even hard to get a visa under the Biden administration, even though they had lifted the ban. But it's this looking at individuals who got visas over the last 4 years and determining, are these people, do they meet the criteria for deportation? So we heard from Abed and Joseph, this connection to NSEERS and the registration process that Obama actually got rid of on one of his final days in office after a campaign from a lot of the civil rights groups, including NIAC, ACLU, ADC, to get rid of this really discriminatory deportation architecture. So we don't have many details on that yet. I think there were some interesting insights on, who oversees that process and what it looks like. But, some of the language in here in Section 3 of the executive order talking about protecting the U.S. from foreign nationals who undermine constitutional rights, including those who provide aid, advocacy, or support for foreign terrorists is, very concerning, because we don't know how that stuff is going to be defined. And it could be defined narrowly in terms of if an individual literally gave support to a terrorist organization, I don't think anybody would have much objections, depending upon the circumstances and so forth.
I'd have objections that they were an IRGC conscript that had no choice in the matter, but
Right.
That's literally another policy.
Right, but not to digress too much. One of the things that Trump talked about on the campaign trail, this was literally in the Republican platform, is deport pro-Hamas radicals and make our college campuses safe again and stuff like this. So is it an expansive, you attended a rally against the war in Gaza, or is it literally material support or something along those lines? That's the area where I'm very concerned. There's been a lot of really dangerous rhetoric, kind of across the board in our political system about those protests and, who got involved for what. Is that going to kind of feed into this kind of deportation architecture that may be being set up? So that's what I'm very concerned about, but we'll have to track that and learn more about it, in the weeks to come.
Can I just add something about waivers?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so the thing about waivers is they were actually, in my experience in the immigrant visa side in the embassy I was in, and I can speak to firsthand experience for people who worked in maybe 2 out of the 3 big posts that did most of the Iranian immigrant visas during the ban. Waivers were actually very, very common. By the end, we were waivering almost every immigrant visa. The thing is, there's 2 things about this. One, the waivers took a very, very long time to process because of how extreme vetting was structured. And the other one was, you have to think, if someone inside the institution is actually interested in kind of softballing or subverting the policy, they're not going to want to be able to openly signal that, oh yeah, we're waivering everyone, right? There was actually a lot of fear in Washington that kind of dad would find out. And I was actually really worried that someone at some point from DC would come in and be like, hey, are you guys just giving waivers to everyone, which we were doing or were trying to do? There's going to be an institutional interest in not making a big fuss if they are waivering people, especially immigrant visas. This actually means that stories from the community and people about how their visa interview went and what was said to them are going to matter a lot more than the actual statistics, right? And so if we're looking at seeing how this policy looks on the ground, it's going to be a situation where, for a number of reasons, honestly because of institutional turf, the official numbers and the annual country visa report is not going to really tell you what's happening on the ground, especially if agencies feel certain levels of discomfort with this. Some agencies are going to massively overstate their numbers of refusals and what they're doing and how many people they're deporting. Some agencies are going to understate, right? But it's going to be a situation where establishing ground truth is going to involve a lot of community listening and kind of almost collective debrief about what's actually happening on the ground.
And just to, hi everyone, this is Etan on staff at NIAC. Just re-raising on to build on that point that, you know, we have if you have stories specifically about your interview process, please do share that with us. Feel free to DM the NIAC Twitter account or email us at the Travel Ban at NIAC Council email account. It's listed also on our Travel Ban Resource Center, which is NIAC Council /Travel Ban. Both are listed on our Twitter page, but we are actively trying to collect a lot more of these stories for a number of organizing efforts across the country. So please do share, and it's just great a community building and open for all organizations or individuals to use. Back to you, Ryan.
Great. Yeah. And I think the resource, the Travel Ban Center, please use it. We're going to update it as fast as we can. We have an FAQ already on there from the new executive order that we posted last night. There are ways to take action. Telling your stories is a big one. Almost all journalists that we've interacted with on the ban over the years has asked, well, hey, I want to speak to people who are directly impacted about this and learn more about the human impacts. And, we've heard a lot of the stories. I know a lot of the people probably on this space have been impacted by the ban personally. We know so many people. It was about 40,000 individuals were from Iran who were denied visas, like through the bureaucratic process. And then looking at the numbers, it's probably another 60,000 who just didn't even bother applying for visas during the ban. They were turned off. They realized it was going to be a big expense. There was no guarantee of success. And so numbers really plummeted. And that's individuals who can't get visas to travel for weddings or funerals or to go to the birth of a child. It's people who are trying to study at universities and it's their lifelong dream and they're unable to get a visa in, very frustrating form, all based on their national origin, where they were born, which is not something they have a choice of. They don't have a choice of who their government is and their relations with the United States. So there's a lot there to unpack. And unfortunately, we're potentially facing this again. And so we need your stories. Please go to the Travel Ban Center on our website, niacouncil.org/travelban. Share your stories. We'll try to connect you and get your message out and protect your privacy if that's something that needs to be done. So definitely want to give a plug there for that. I think we've been through the executive order, the ban component, if you will, of the ban before. We know a degree of what that might look like. Iran in particular doesn't have relations with the United States. So there's, I think, minimal transmission of information from the Iranian bureaucratic apparatus and the United States bureaucratic apparatus on screening and vetting. Iran is listed as a state sponsor of terror. There are major entities in Iran, in particular the IRGC, that is listed as a foreign terrorist organization. All of these, I think, when you take the executive order criteria, make it extremely likely that Iran will be among the countries targeted at the end of the 60-day process or earlier. So we are trying to prepare and provide as many resources for the community as possible on this because we know the impact is going to be really big and significant. So thanks. And I think I'll pass it off to others who want to hop in and speak as well.
This is Abid. I want to jump in real quick, just on the strategy moving forward, and I know the conversation about waivers came up, but, we may have to consider some sort of engagement to make sure that the waivers we want in the waiver process actually does go through this time. I don't think it's a guarantee that there will be waivers. I think we need to apply pressure on the administration to do it. And I still think we do need any legal or any litigation strategy will probably be around the exclusion part. And for those that may be impacted, you're not sure, you're worried, listen, I think the next 60 days are crucial to really play within the rules, especially for a lot of the students here. I hate saying it, but Try not to get pulled over, try not to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. There's still a lot of variables up in the air that we don't know about. We don't know how aggressive they're going to be in implementing this. We don't even know how they're going to implement it. It may be an NSEER style program where you have to register, you have to get fingerprints, or you have to report. That's all still up in the air. We don't have that many details, but the best thing we could do for ourselves at this moment is don't get in any trouble. Now's not the time to mess around. Now, just let's wait until things fall in place so we have a clear idea of how those that are currently here in the U.S. Get impacted by this.
I also think if you're an Iranian student in the United States, it's time to lock down your social media and be very, very circumspect about everything. And then also like have a little story in your head about how you being there benefits the United States, right? Like my presence on this F1 program benefits U.S. national well-being in this variety of ways. Like it's time to prepare for, like types of scrutiny that haven't existed before.
Very good points. I would second that, those recommendations there. We do have a couple of questions from the audience. The first one is, why do we think that they did a 60-day review process and not just reimpose the ban or repeal Biden's repeal of the ban, what have you? I'll see it. Yeah, Joseph, you've got your hand up with the bureaucratic insights.
Yeah, because that's how it was happening last time, and it also if you make it diffuse, it removes like a sudden point of shock and resistance. Right. So this is about implementing a ban that's clearly intended to be here to stay, but also re-implementing not the ban itself that existed before, but the ban mechanism itself that existed before. The periodic 60 and then I think there were 90-day reviews actually did happen, and like you get the reports in your cables inbox every 3 months of like, these are the countries we're adding, these are the countries we're removing, these are the things that we're watching. So what this is and what it says to me is it's much more about like establishing a procedure that justifies the ban rather than just creating a ban.
Abed, I think that happened.
So look, for me, it's the 60-day. Like I said earlier, they're more savvy. They're not going to be as sloppy as they were, and they're going to play look like they're playing by the rules. So they're going to put the 60 days out there. Then they're going to come back and say, well, we did our research, we vetted, we looked into security, we did X, Y, Z. So it's going to make it harder to really, for some of the folks that are in the middle that maybe this wasn't a ban. The Trump administration is going to make it harder this time around for them to call it a ban, a Muslim ban. And you're going to see this in a lot of their policies and a lot of the programs they do implement over the course of the next month, year, and even moving forward. But again, they're more savvy, they're smarter, and they're not going to be as sloppy as they were 8 years ago.
All right, I've got one more question here, and that was great answers. Really appreciate it. So can they fundamentally change visas, as Joseph described earlier, unilaterally without legislation? Essentially, how permanent of a mark do we think they can make on the visa process without some buy-in from Congress?
I mean, I think we saw it last time, right? The administration of visas is remember it's backed by the doctrine of what's called consular non-reviewability, right? Where the visa process, and by this I don't mean the Immigration and Nationality Act, I don't mean the law, but the process of adjudicating a visa is something that the State Department can make decisions internally, and it also doesn't have to justify or explain its decision. If you go back to the Supreme Court case Kerry versus Din, the Supreme Court ruled that the decisions of a visa officer are not reviewable, and that they don't even in certain situations have to fully explain why they made that decision, and nor can you appeal it. So the visa process is kind of a very powerful point for the executive branch within the immigration system for exactly this reason. It's bulletproof, and there's an ongoing project called the Consular Accountability Project that's trying to kind of like explain, and a disclosure of which I'm kind of involved, that's trying to disclose and explain how visa policy works in this space of impunity. But for non-immigrant visas, they have quite a lot of authority. For immigrant visas, there are still underlying legal rights for U.S. persons that they can exercise.
Okay, Eitan, I think you wanted to hop in with a few points on a corollary issue.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on the points noting the sort of carryover effects of these policies for students specifically. It's definitely an issue I think we as a community, as a coalition, need to lean into. I think it dovetails decently well with some of the things that have been said in the Republican debate around H-1 visas, et cetera, regardless of where you stand on that issue. Mainly, I've heard from a lot of anecdotal stories from Iranian American students, Iranian students in Massachusetts and in other places that have been accepted to elite universities that are worried. And this is definitely an issue I think we will continue to lean in on. NIAC has tried to push back on a number of discriminatory carryover bills and initiatives. One last year in my home state of Florida from Governor DeSantis that banned universities from recruiting Chinese, Iranian, North Korean, Cuban, Venezuelan, and Syrian students for graduate research and employment programs, effectively making it impossible to go as a graduate student there to those universities. This another, and then we also have submitted a letter earlier in 2023 to Secretary of State Blinken on behalf of a large group of over 800 Iranian students on this issue. So we'll continue to lean in. Another invitation as well for folks to submit stories about their individual experiences. We will protect your anonymity as necessary, but this is an important component to this issue. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Eitan. And I see Curtis Morrison is here. He has a lot of experience, dealing with all of the issues that Iranians and others encounter in the immigration process. Curtis, if you're open to speak, I think we'd love to have you up here as a speaker. So I think someone will be sending that invite if you haven't received it already. We have one question because, this order does hint at the possibility of deportation for individuals who have received a valid visa. Now, we know individuals accepted here, I think, have far more rights than individuals who have not received a visa, who are not here in the United States. This may be somewhat of a novel issue, and we don't know the degree to which this is going to be enforced. So I think the general question here is, what rights do individuals here on valid visas have if they've been issued visas in the last 4 years? And what do we know about the possible criteria that currently exists that may serve as the basis for what the Trump administration tries to do in this regard? Does anyone want to answer that?
Hi, Brian, this is Curtis.
Yep.
I'll start since you referenced me, and thank you. In my view, like the 212F does not give him INA 212F, the section that he uses for travel bans, only gives him the authority to stop entry into the U.S. So he cannot use 212F to do anything with people that are already here. So I think he's trying to break new ground here. There's not statutory authority to use a prior 212F to retroactively apply a 212F entry ban. Once you're in, you're in. However, they could do something creative and use existing authorities that maybe were not outlined. And so I think that's what we have to look out for. And so in my live this morning, I gave this guidance. And I feel bad about it because you shouldn't have to. But I think that if you are a vulnerable community, you're an Iranian student, you probably need to be squeaky clean while you're in the U.S. under the Trump administration. And I don't know, I feel bad about saying that, but that's the reality. You don't want to take any risk.
Like, I think it should be conceptualized of as any point of contact you have with the immigration system is a situation of intense vulnerability, right? It's the same way that, you think about interacting with a cop or anyone else. It's like, the further away you can stay from this and just like SEVIS knows you're good, your schools knows you're good, you keep a very low profile, that's it. That's kind of the way to get through, because the way it works is these decisions, unless there's a proactive investigation, which is like, it's undefined who would do that, and it's undefined the scale of what that would be. But unless there's a proactive interaction you have with the immigration system, if you're in status, you're in status. Like, sleeping dogs lie unless there's a point of adjudication.
I agree 100%.
Okay, let me give one more plug. We'll probably be wrapping up here in a few minutes, but if you do have questions, our DM at NIA Council is open. As well, you can email us at travelban@niacouncil.org. Curtis, since you're a little bit new to the space, do you mind just giving kind of the bird's eye overview of kind of what you're expecting with this ban, and what is being set up with this new executive order, concerns, things that most concern you about the order?
I think some of the prior speakers covered a lot of that really well. The thing that scares me about it most is the novel stuff about the retroactive application. Because at least with a ban where they say, okay, this is who it impacts, this is who is accepted, this is who is eligible for waivers, it's like a process. But this new thing that they're talking about, I really don't know the process on that. Where they're like, anybody that came in the U.S. since January 20th, 2021, we can look back at your case. I mean, like, I represent many U.S. citizens that came in on either IR1s or they came in on the green card, but they served in the military or something like that. They're U.S. citizens. How on earth could he look back at U.S. citizens and try to apply an entry ban? That's the part that like freaks me out a little bit. I guess that's my big concern about like what we don't see coming, but we'll know more. We'll know how bad it is in 2 or 3 months. We will not know about that now. And what's frustrating is we're going to get asked that by thousands of people in the next couple days, but we really won't know how bad it is until 2 or 3 months from now.
I'll also outline a bit some of the things that we see coming, and that you can do to kind of take action. If you're, kind of U.S. citizen, you'd like to contact your lawmakers, you can certainly do that on the ban. I think the way that the ban came out last time, it was, Trump's first week in office. You had members of Congress showing up to airports, joining protests that kind of were spontaneous across the U.S., really rejecting that order and its impact, very visible impact on a lot of people who were literally ripped apart from their families. Things are looking a little bit different this time because it's going to be kind of a 60-day rollout, kind of a bureaucratic review, and there's probably going to be a lot of notice going in ahead of time. But lawmakers have conducted, I think, very good oversight of the ban in the past. That started with Senator Van Hollen getting some reporting requirements in place, so we started to know how many people were being impacted by the ban, where they came from, that sort of thing. Once Congress flipped to Democrats at the midterms during the first Trump administration, they conducted a hearing on the ban, brought in people to tell their stories, and And I think that was the moment Joseph talked about, waivers really started being processed much more after that point. So another thing that Congress has done is pass the No Ban Act. They simply don't have the numbers to pass that legislation right now. It would impose some guardrails on the Trump administration, any presidency's 212F authorities. That passed the House a couple of times. It was included in Build Back Better, but it was dropped from that legislative package. We do anticipate that the No Ban Act will come back again, but again, tough sledding, real tough sledding. So we might see reporting requirements, we might see some pushback, but Republicans do control both the House and the Senate, and so we're unlikely to see hearings specifically on the ban or significant pressure unless things change. Abed did mention pressure for an effective waiver system. I think that's a really important point, and NIAC would be happy to partner on that. We don't want to see any bans on the basis of national origin in general, but at minimum, I think let's have a waiver process. Let's make it be effective if this ban is going to go forward and impact a lot of people. Separately, maybe this would be something that Curtis could weigh in on a little bit more, but there is litigation that can, be impactful at the individual level, even if you're not going up to the Supreme Court and, knocking down the travel ban or something like that. So there was, I think it was a Imami et al. Litigation, which provided some forms of relief and gained some wins amid the Biden administration. That process, I think, is, still in place to some degree. So it'll be interesting to see what can happen there. And then, we have mandamus lawsuits and other things that can, help individuals. So, Curtis, do you want to weigh in on kind of the litigation pathways?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I usually focus on two different kinds of pathways. One is a group lawsuit using the vehicle of joinder to challenge policies that are unlawful. And I've been doing that with groups. And then also we do individual mandamus lawsuits where we represent an individual family with a delay. A lot of people want to bring these cases immediately after the interview. We experimented with that a year or so ago. It doesn't work. My hard, fast rule is the delay has to be 6 months before we file a mandamus lawsuit for unreasonable delays. But every attorney has a different rule on that. Someone wait a year or 2 years or something like that. So there are things that you can do before the ban right now, because you could file a mandamus lawsuit now. Government would have to answer within 60 days. So there's a chance that they would look. There's more than a chance that they're going to look closely at the case to see if it's being processed correctly. We know that they do that when a lawsuit is filed. So my first recommendation for people that are experiencing a long delay right now already in AP is to do something about it right now while they still can, because that opportunity is going to be much more limited when there is a travel ban. Then it'll probably be just group lawsuits challenging policies, and those kind of lawsuits, as we learned during the first Trump administration, those lawsuits last a lot longer and the fight's a lot harder because they know what's at stake. They want to hang on to their policy.
Thanks, Curtis. And Curtis is at Red Eagle Law. You can go to niacouncil.org/travel ban for our travel ban center. He's one of the lawyers who has a lot of experience with the Iranian community, and you can consult him if you need an immigration lawyer to fight for you. So thanks, Curtis. We have a question again on the waiver process, which there's no ban yet. It's likely coming. And so we don't know if there is a waiver process or not, but this question is, given the Marco Rubio confirmation hearing last week where he distinguished that Iranians are different from their government, can they get waivers? So does anyone want to address that specifically?
Yeah, just in terms of this was always something difficult to talk with people in terms of their own visa interview and experience, because while this process is clearly politicized in a bad faith way, the waiver process was never politicized itself. I had so many people come up to me during the first ban and just be like, I'm not Muslim, or like, I don't like the Islamic Republic, or like, I like America, or like, I don't agree with my government. And that's not criteria for a waiver, right? So when it comes down to waiver criteria, it's going to be like, one, how are they delineated, right? And what specifically are the categories? So last time it was basically national interest, undue hardship, or and national security were the three prongs of the waiver that you had to qualify for, right? Basically, like, is it in the national interest of the United States to let you in? Is someone in the United States experiencing undue hardship because you are not being let in? And otherwise, are you good to go from a security perspective, right? So attitudes like Iranians aren't their government, or we like Iranian students, it's not automatic. Marco Rubio or someone, or even the special envoy for Iran, saying that doesn't mean that visa policy run out of the Bureau of Consular Affairs, a completely different subgroup of the State Department, is going to turn on a dime, nor does it mean that they consider those sorts of ideological things. For example, there's other bigger factors, and one of the points that I always try to make is the Muslim ban introduces new rules, but it also doesn't get rid of old ones, right? So if someone like Elon Musk says, we love Iranian students, and if Marco Rubio says, well, Iranian people aren't their government, and then you're standing in front of a visa officer who statistically knows that like 80% of Iranian students stay in the United States for economic reasons, they're going to deny your visa, but that's because they think you're an intending immigrant and you'll never go back to Iran, not because of a larger political point. I hope that wasn't too much information. I hope it's kind of clear that the waiver criteria are going to be the waiver criteria on top of qualifying for the visa in the first place, right? So although there is ideological screening, that can kind of only work against you. It can never work for you. Right. And it's something where it can be used in a punitive way, but making an ideological expression of like an anti-Iranian government or statements pro the administration, which people made to me in visa interviews, didn't affect their eligibility for a waiver.
Interesting. Thanks for that insight. We had one more question. We're probably going to do kind of a final call for questions. So if you want to DM us at NIA Council or email email at travelban@niacouncil.org. So this question is, you keep saying there's no ban yet, but the extreme vetting provisions in this latest order say it should start extreme vetting promptly. Sorry for that. So I'll try to unpack this one. There is no ban yet formally on issuing visas, to Iranian nationals and other nationals who could be targeted by a ban. The extreme vetting, I'll have to unpack that one, because in the first bans, Trump introduced this separate process called extreme vetting, and Biden never rescinded that. So that is a lot of the bureaucratic legwork that needs to be done by State Department and DHS. And Joseph, you can hop in here and try to explain extreme vetting a little bit better than I can. But going back through people's social media history over 15 years and other information that is out there in the public domain, to see, is this person a security risk? Are they connected to the Iranian government in some way? These are the kind of questions that are being probed, in the first Trump administration, in the Biden administration, and now again in the second Trump term. Now, I think what the new executive order has done is to say we're going to really enforce to the fullest extent vetting of individuals who are coming here kind of across the board, but particularly from countries that are, have security risks, et cetera. So extreme vetting has been in place for about 8 years now. It has continued, and then this executive order sets up kind of a toughening of what is, I think, already on the books, and maybe an expansion of what is already on the books. One of the things that the Trump campaign talked about is kind of a ideological tests and so forth as part of the visa process. I think some of this is already baked in, but it is kind of a process that's already there. Does anyone want to add to that understanding of extreme vetting?
Yeah, I can actually lend a bit of clarification to that from my own experience. The last time extreme vetting came around, and I'm sorry, my cat's hungry and very angry and shouting in the background. But so extreme vetting, I never, in the 2.5 years that I did the Muslim ban and the 4 years I served under Trump, never figured out what exactly that was. Right. And it's not because it was mysterious or secret. It's basically because every agency had to go around and be like, yeah, we're doing it extreme now. We're hitting the extreme button. People I know who actually worked in counterterrorism fields were just like, what do you mean? Like, was what we're doing now not already strict? Right. So it was undefined, but it was also never something that, like, in the actual visa interview in the embassy or consulate, like, we went extreme mode on, right? There was no difference in our daily flow of what that meant. Basically, there was kind of an eventual certification that the standard procedures were sufficiently extreme. It just means that we did them to more people, which clogged up the system and made it go slower. Now, stepping away from state, like, because it should be said about administrative processing, like, it's not done by the visa officer at the embassy, right? It's not like the guy who interviews your grandma and grandpa for a visa and asks your grandpa about his military service, like, goes back and starts, looking him up online in the back office in the afternoon. It doesn't work that way. Basically, you send it into this process called the security advisory opinion, which is multi-agency. And from the visa officer perspective, that's a black box. You send it, you set it, you forget it. Your obligation to that case is done. You get to go to lunch, right? But where it could make the biggest impact is actually inside that black box of administrative processing, or the SAO process. Who is actually making the calls within that rotation? One thing that I've kind of been tracking, and a lot of people have been tracking over the past couple of years, is the emergence of what's called fusion centers, which are this kind of like DHS-led kind of aimless set of intelligence and surveillance centers in the United States that don't, up until now, seemingly have a defined mission and love butting in to other agencies' stuff just to kind of find make work for themselves. I'm personally really worried that a lot of the surveillance, the going through Facebook posts, the going through people's Instagrams, it's not going to happen by the visa officers in the consulates, who are frankly too busy to do that. But these sorts of, like, jobless and, if I can editorialize, kind of politically reactionary fusion centers could start making themselves known inside the opaque administrative processing process. I know that, like, Curtis, you filed a lot of mandamus lawsuits for people who are in AP. It's opaque to you. It was opaque to us, right? And I think that opacity is something where there's going to be groups institutionally that will want to stake out turf for themselves, being busybodies and surveilling people's political opinions.
Okay, thanks for that color on that issue on extreme vetting. We are getting more questions. Again, you can DM us at NIA Council or email us travelban@niacouncil.org. So this question, is it possible to discuss what you think will happen to the ongoing processes in the next 60 days, especially Iranians in the U.S. with adjustments of status pending? Does anyone want to take that one? All right, I'll try to address that preliminarily here. Again, the executive order sets out that within 60 days, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State are going to come up with a list of which nations need to be blocked from kind of the visa process, and partially or in whole. So that part we have been through before. We somewhat understand. Joseph, do you mind kind of hopping in and saying what happened to adjustments of status under the last ban? Was that something that was affected by the ban and could be affected going forward?
So I was never a USCIS guy, but as I understood it for the previous ban, the previous ban, PP 9645 and what we called EO 17, which was 1738 something, that was about the issuance of visas, right? It was directing the Department of State to act differently in their administration of a executive branch process to a non-US person, right? Adjustments of status happen in terms of like the law, like domestically inside the United States. I would be inclined if I were to say, okay, say if the previous ban had just come back, I'd be like, AOS is going to be normal. If your AOS is pending, there's two things that could happen with this like directed review of people already admitted, right? The first is it gets folded into the adjustments of status somehow, right? And then you are somehow subject to that review process while you're doing your AOS. I don't think they're likely to do that because that would make the process of AOS longer and kind of let you stay in America more. The second is you adjust status, it goes per normal, nothing really happens, and then you are immediately folded into the process of review for deportation if that happens. I don't see any, I'm going to actually check the EO for USCIS. I don't see any mention of them in there other than that of them as a subsidiary of Homeland Security. So I don't see anything explicitly about adjustment of status right now, but I would be aware that if you're in a position where you are adjusting status, which is to say you're already in the United States, and you've gone there after 2021, that does mean that you're gonna be subject to whatever kind of review process is coming up, right?
Okay, great. We also had this question come in essentially on social media history, and is that something that the Trump administration could look at if you're an individual here on a visa that could be subject to the ban? I think we will potentially be getting a lot of questions on that, but just kind of very high level, kind of take. And Joseph, I think you're the main speaker kind of left with us at this point. So thanks for sticking it out. Do you think this is a valid concern? Do you think people should be cautious if they're here on, kind of temporary status here on a visa from a nation that could be subject to the ban?
I mean, this is kind of terra nullius, right? Because looking at people's social media, I mean, I can speak to it as a visa officer. I mean, sometimes you Google it, but that's either because like you're bored at work or because you think that there's something relevant to the main decision you're making as a visa officer. Someone says, oh yeah, we've been married 2 years, and I go back through your Instagram and you're like with some bunch of photos with some other woman a year ago. That's weird. Looking at it in an explicitly politicized way, what I can say is, one, we don't know. Two, it's probably not going to be the State Department. Three, I don't think at this point anyone has the resources to do that very closely, right? I mean, if you think about what they're asking with the Directorate of National Intelligence, right? If you are going to task the intelligence community with going through people's social media, think about it from a bureaucrat's perspective. You're a hotshot. You're a CIA analyst, right? You're an NSA analyst, and you're used to wiretapping Hezbollah's phones. And then someone comes up to you and says, hey, the president wants you to do rote immigration screening. How are you going to feel about that? And what kind of priority are you going to give that job? right? It's not going to be something that anyone's chomping at the bit to do, which is why I'm going to return to this thing of the fusion centers. Also, HSI, which is the investigative and law enforcement branch of ICE. This is going to be probably a task that's going to be flopped off onto, to be completely blunt, the least respected government agencies, right? Which is also going to be a problem because they're going to be probably on a bit of a power trip about it. That's a good way to say you shouldn't post very much. But the content of what you're posting, remember, like, there's a lot going on right now and a lot of buzz about this idea of what's called endorsing or espousing terrorism. And what they talk about is endorse or espouse terrorist activity, which is basically you say it's good or you say it's good that it happened, right? This executive order doesn't define terrorism very narrowly in the way that other parts of immigration regulation do. That's what you've got to really look out for, right? And what I do see, and I think this is an intentional side effect, with a lot of Iranian nationals that I talk to doing visa consultations or just people I met doing visa interviews when I was a consular officer, there's a kind of hypersensitivity to possible statements, but also a fear that comes from not knowing what kind of the red line is or what your statements can be interpreted as. I would say that caution is, at least for the next couple of months, at least I'd say until midsummer, probably kind of warranted. And the less you say online in any capacity, the better. I have seen a wide range of various attitudes towards like cybersecurity and digital footprint among Iranians that I have talked to in various capacities. That goes everything from I'm deleting my Instagram that's just vacation pictures because I think I might get in trouble for it, at the extreme end, to yeah, it's no problem that I've kept a photo of my old Sepah military ID on my phone when I'm crossing the U.S. border, right? At the, like, that's pretty, like, not a good idea, right? And so, you know, I would tend towards the first one, the more extreme one of just, like, stay very quiet, make your stuff private, and until it becomes clear jurisdictionally exactly who is looking for this stuff and what their decision matrix is. That was long and a bit rambling because this is something where we kind of have to hypothesize and kind of walk through the process of like, how does this work and who's going to be looking at it?
Thank you so much, Joseph, for that last thought there. I wanted to thank all of our speakers who joined today, including our key moderator, Ryan Costello, NIAC's Policy Director. Wanted to thank Joseph Burton. I wanted to thank Yasmin Taib and Abid Ayub, all of our partners here for joining. Our audience members, I know it's now over 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and also morning on the Pacific Time, and for friends joining from all over the world. Thank you so much for listening to this space. We will be recording the space. We've recorded the space and we hope to post it soon. But in the meantime, as my colleagues have mentioned, we have set up a travel ban resource center. That's NIAC Council/travel ban, niaccouncil.org/travel ban. This is a resource center that lists, if you have any questions for us, FAQ, the latest FAQs on the newest executive order from Trump. We also have materials in Farsi, know your rights, and in English as well. If you have any stories, if you already are feeling the impacts of this ban, or if you've already experienced it before during the first term of Trump, feel free to DM us, or you could share it through our forum, also at the Travel Ban Resource Center. That is niaccouncil.org/travel ban. Again, thank you so much to all the speakers, our audience members, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. Thank you.